Hi, class. Today we're going to look at blood pressure and fluid exchange. So we know that blood pressure is what drives the blood to be delivered to all the cells in the body, and it needs to have enough pressure so that the blood that is pumped from the heart can reach all the extremities, the fingers, the toes, the brain, most importantly. But uncontrolled high blood pressure can lead to problems like stroke, heart attack, heart failure, or kidney failure. However, because there are no symptoms, one third of people with high blood pressure don't even know they have it. So that is why they call hypertension or high blood pressure the silent killer. The only way to tell if you have high blood pressure or hypertension is to have your blood pressure checked. Now, you probably have seen those sphygmomanometer machines or blood pressure machines in some places like pharmacies. They would have them in the corner, and usually they're free. So it would be a good idea for you to sit down and have your blood pressure checked. You just put your arm in, usually your left, relax, maybe take a couple of deep breaths to just calm your system. And you press a couple of buttons and you're done. So it is a good idea to know what your normal range of blood pressure is so that you know if there is, in case there is a problem and you check your blood pressure, then you know if it went up or went down than your normal blood pressure level. So it is a good idea to know your blood pressure. So I just checked my blood pressure with my sphygmomanometer at home, and my blood pressure is usually in the range of 112 over 70. So what do these numbers mean? Well, the upper number is called the systolic blood pressure. I'm just going to call blood pressure BP from now on. And the lower number, so when you say 112 over 70, the bottom number is the diastolic blood pressure. And what they mean is that the upper number, the systolic or the systolic blood pressure, is when the ventricles, recall that the ventricles are the muscular part of your heart, the bottom part. This is when the ventricles are pumping or contracting. And the diastole or diastolic blood pressure would be the pressure of the blood against the walls of the ventricles when the ventricles relax. So, in this lesson, we're going to look at systolic and diastolic blood pressure. And because we can't do the lab where you actually measure your own blood pressure with the sphygmomanometer, and you listen to your heartbeat with a stethoscope. You can also measure your O2 saturation in your blood or how much oxygen is in your blood with an O2 sat device that we have at school, but we're just going to have to go and watch some videos on how a sphygmomanometer works in measuring the systolic and diastolic blood pressure. We're going to look at the extrinsic factors. The extrinsic are the external or the outside things which will affect the blood pressure, things like exercise or lack of, our diets, and what we put in our body, like nicotine or drugs, for example. We're going to differentiate between vasodilation and vasoconstriction. We're going to describe the control of blood pressure by the autonomic nervous system. That is the part of the body where it's automatic. We don't have to think about that. Most of the functions of the brain is autonomic, stuff like breathing, heart rate, and regulation of hormones, and all the things that are happening in our body. You could almost think of our conscious part of the brain as just the tip of the iceberg. And some people have said that it's only the 10% because when you put an iceberg in water, 90% of it is actually submerged. So much like how our brain works. And why would you need to worry about that? How to beat, how the heart beats, and how to control your breathing. that won't be good, because if you fall asleep, then right, then you won't be able to regulate your breathing and your heart rate. So most of our brain activity is autonomic or automatic. We're going to list and describe the factors which affect the arteriolar resistance. That's the resistance in the arteries as the blood is pumping, as the heart is pumping the blood to all the cells in our body. We're going to explain how the changes in blood pressure help to maintain homeostasis in the body. From the beginning of this course, we've looked at the focus of the course is it's all about homeostasis. And when we look at the organs and the organ systems, it's really all working together to maintain homeostasis in the body. It's all about balance. We're going to explain how blood pressure and osmotic pressure contribute to fluid exchange at the capillary level. The capillary, as you recall, is the one cell thick layer. So this is very, very thin, and diffusion or the movement of particles can happen naturally from high concentration to low concentration in the capillaries because they're very thin. We're going to look at the term hypertension and discuss the cause, effect, and treatment. So let's go ahead now and look at blood pressure. So blood pressure, well, we know that blood pressure is it's important, and that is one of the things that the doctor will check when you go for a checkup. What is the blood pressure? And they check for the heart rate, they check for the breathing. So blood pressure is the force of blood against the walls of the arteries. And why do we need to have pressure at all? Well, your heart is the pump, it's the life pump. And in order for the blood to go all over your body to every single cell, the heart must push the blood out of the heart with enough pressure so that it can get to its destination, the extremities all over the body. So that is the blood pressure. The highest pressure occurs in guess what? The largest artery in the body, the largest vessel actually, and it carries the oxygenated blood. And why does it have to have the highest pressure? Because the aorta will have to take again the blood from the heart to every single cell in the body. Compare that with the pulmonary artery, where it only takes the blood from the heart to the lungs, which is right beside the heart, whereas the aorta has to take the blood to every single cell in the body. So as the blood passes into smaller vessels and the distance from the heart becomes greater or farther, the pressure becomes reduced. So the highest pressure is the one that's closest to the heart. So the pressure in any artery varies. It's different because of two major factors. Well, one is cardiac output, and the second one is the resistance within the artery. So in the cardiac output, the two things that affect the cardiac output is how much blood, this is the amount of blood that can be pumped out of the heart in one heartbeat. It is affected by two things: the volume of the blood, how much blood there is in the body, and the heart rate. So if the volume of the heart decreases, I'll just put the arrow going down, then the blood pressure will eventually decrease as well. An example of this happening is if there is an injury where there is a massive blood loss. What happens is, because the blood volume is going down, there is less blood in the body, the blood pressure will also go down, which is a good thing then, that the blood pressure goes down. That is your body's defense so that it doesn't spill all the blood out of that injury. The bad thing about that is, because your blood pressure is going down, because of the blood loss, your um, your capillaries in the extremities of your body will not be receiving enough blood. So it's good and bad in that way, because you're losing blood, your blood pressure, your body is reducing the blood pressure, but at the same time, you're not going to get enough blood all over your body because there's not enough pressure. The heart rate will also affect that cardiac output. As the heart rate, call it HR, the heart rate increases, your blood pressure will also increase because your heart is beating faster. It is also going to result in the blood pressure being forced out of the heart stronger. Um, this would happen in exercise or in emotions where the heart rate will increase. We covered in the previous lesson um, what will cause the heart rate to increase. Two things. One is physical activity, where the fight or flight hormone, adrenaline, then kicks in because physical or norepinephrine actually, or noradrenaline kicks in to increase the heart rate because of physical activity. Because as if you're running, for example, your blood is going to have to um, be delivered to your legs faster because you're using the oxygen faster, and you also need to get rid of the carbon dioxide out of those cells faster. So your heart is going to need to beat faster. And the other one is emotional state, where um, your hormones then will either increase or decrease the heart rate. So as the heart rate decreases, your blood pressure will also decrease, as in rest or um, sleeping. This is what happens. So some people can actually control their heart rate so drastically low that their blood pressure also goes down. In most people, actually, if not all, you could somewhat control your heart rate and your blood pressure just by breathing. And there is a lot of research more that it is important that we actually practice deep breathing, and slow, deep breath can actually instantaneously lower your heart rate and your blood pressure. And in turn, you can um, relax yourself that way just by breathing. Uh, we can call it, it's called biofeedback or neurofeedback. So the other factor that affects blood pressure is arteriolar resistance, or the resistance in the walls of the artery. So the three things that affect the resistance in the artery are size, elasticity, and size and elasticity, these two. Um, so as the arteries dilate or widen, the vessel volume will increase, and this results in the blood pressure decreasing because the opening in the arteries are wider. So there is no need for the blood pressure to be higher, because the it's like opening the door. You don't have to really push your way out forcefully. The door's wide open, so you just go. Um, the opposite would be, as the arteries constrict, your blood pressure will increase because it's like the door is now narrower. So but your heart is still beating the same amount, and your blood pressure then is going to have to be higher, because it has to get to its destination. The blood has to get to these cells. Elasticity, uh, your blood vessels need to be elastic. It needs to be able to stretch when the heart is pumping, and it needs to be able to go back to its natural regular size when the heart is relaxing and the pressure is lower. However, if the vessels harden, and this is a problem, it's called hardening of arteries. We're going to talk about these issues later on. Hardening of the arteries, meaning it's not going to be elastic, then the blood pressure can actually increase. And this is one of the causes of hypertension. We briefly talked about measuring blood pressure, and again, with the numbers that are describing the systolic pressure over the diastolic pressure. And this is measured with an instrument called sphygmomanometer. And sphygmomanometer historically is made of a narrow tube with mercury inside, but we're not supposed to have any mercury in the schools anymore. So we actually and the sphygmomanometer that they sell no longer have any mercury inside them. So it's mostly digital. So the two different pressures are measured and compared in blood pressure reading. Again, we did talk about this just previously. The systolic pressure is when the ventricles contract. It's good to hear it once again. When the ventricles are contracting, that would be, if you recall, this is the lub part of when you're listening to a status with a stethoscope to the heartbeat. It sounds like lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. I'm gonna post that sound in the blog. So this is when the ventricles are contracting. The diastolic pressure would be the pressure of the blood against the ventricles as they relax. And this is the dub part when you're listening to it with a stethoscope. So we need to know what these devices are. Sphygmomanometer measures the blood pressure, and a stethoscope is an instrument that you can use to listen to your heartbeat. Now let's talk about high blood pressure or hypertension. So regularly, normal range should not exceed 140 over 90. So what these numbers mean is the historical experiment that they did with measuring blood pressure was they stuck a pipe, a glass tube into a horse's artery, and the pressure went up, and they were able to measure that in millimeters of mercury. Hg is mercury, and the diastolic, when the ventricle is relaxed, is the lower number here. So if you look at the blood pressure, if it's over 140 over 90, this is considered hypertension. But again, it all depends on the person's normal range. For some people, 140 over 90 may be okay, and they are okay with that blood pressure, or if it's too high. So it all depends. That is why, again, I suggest you guys, when you go to Shoppers or Safeway or any pharmacy, just go have a seat and take a look at that machine and use it to check your blood pressure. It's always a good idea. Hypertension can occur in people of all ages. It can actually occur in children or adults, but it's more common among people over age 35, and in middle age and elderly people, obese people, heavy drinkers, and women who are taking birth control pills or other pills. That medication can also affect the blood pressure. It can also run in families. We call it genetic predisposition, but many people with a strong family history of high blood pressure never have it. People with diabetes, gout, or kidney disease are more likely to have hypertension as well. So there are many reasons why people can get hypertension, but a lot of times people get hypertension for unknown reason. So it's not necessarily these factors that we talked about. So these terms we've defined before. So I'll just say see page 33. We already know the definition of systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. So now that we know what those numbers mean from a sphygmomanometer, which is more dangerous to be higher than normal, systolic or diastolic pressure? Remember that systolic is the number on the top and diastolic is the one that's over. Well, the diastolic one would be more dangerous. Why? Because the heart is relaxing during diastolic pressure because the ventricles are relaxed at this point. That means it's not pumping the blood. Um, you don't want it to have a high pressure because if the heart is already resting, not resting, is relaxed, the ventricles are relaxed, the pressure shouldn't be high. Um, and if it is high, then that could be a problem with either the heart not working efficiently to pump the blood, so it has to work harder, and that could lead to problems down the road. It could eventually weaken the heart and could lead to heart failure. The factors causing hypertension are not well understood. So 90% of the cases of hypertension, the cause is unknown. What are the causes of hypertension? The ones that we know of, well, it's lifestyle could cause hypertension, diets could cause hypertension as well, genetic predisposition would be one of those things as well. Now, in terms of lifestyle, there are risk factors these are the risk factors that we can control. These are the lifestyle. So things like smoking, physical inactivity, obesity, diet, salt intake, diabetes, and stress. Of course, there's a kind of diabetes that we cannot control. That's diabetes type 1. But in most cases, we can control these things. So these are the risk factors. That would be your lifestyle and diet. So those 2 out of 3 already we can control. The risk factors that we can't control are age, ethnicity. Some ethnic backgrounds tend to have an increased risk of hypertension than others, and family history. So these are the genetics. It's built in our DNA. That does not mean, though, that if your parents or someone in your family have hypertension, that you will as well. Again, there are risk factors that we can control. The goal of treatment for hypertension is first to reduce the diastolic blood pressure to be less than 90. So treatment may be diet, something like you can reduce your salt intake. Weight loss would always help if the person is overweight, and drug medication. If none of those first 2 things work, then medication would be something that they will consider. The excess fluid that the salt holds in the body may also put an added burden on the heart and waterlog the blood vessels, meaning that the body is going to try to retain water because of the high salt concentration, because your body is trying to dilute the high salt concentration. So you're not eliminating the water. Your kidneys are actually retaining it. So you're keeping the water inside your body, and it's going to waterlog the blood vessel, causing them to contract or narrow more easily. And the blood vessels then take less diluted blood to the organs of the body because it is keeping a lot of water than it should be because of too much salt. So again, the diet we can control. And so this can lead to so many problems because then the cell of some oxygen will deprive us, because the cells will be deprived of some oxygen and nutrients that they need because it's diluted by water. So for this reason, the low sodium diet would be used for treating mild to moderately severe hypertension. But with severe hypertension, salt restriction must be severe in addition to medication. And also, exercise is always going to be um, a good effect on the body. During exercise, the heart pumps faster, increasing the blood pressure in the vessel. So, fatty tissue requires a lot of blood to feed it. So, another way to reduce blood pressure and stress on the heart is to lose weight. When you lose the extra fat, you are going to not overwork the heart. Medications called diuretics, which will help rid the body of excess salt and therefore excess water, are often prescribed by the doctor in the treatment of hypertension. So, the blood pressure in capillaries and veins. The blood pressure in the capillary will be significantly reduced because in the capillaries, again, these are extremely thin and they have to be so that the diffusion of nutrients and oxygen carbon dioxide can occur in the capillaries. That's the blood and cell exchange. Capillaries are very, very tiny and very, very thin. So the blood pressure is extremely low. It would be lower. So the pressure as it enters the capillaries will significantly decrease. So the blood pressure is lowest in the capillary. The blood pressure in the veins um, would be the BP in the veins would be lower than the blood pressure in the arteries. The arteries would have to have a higher blood pressure because it is taking the blood from the heart to everywhere else, to all the cells in the body. So it needs to go from the heart to everywhere else, whereas the veins return the blood back to the heart, and it is also coming back, so the pressure is lower. So there's no pump from away from the heart, so it is much lower. So the issue then is, if the blood pressure in the vein is low, how then can the blood return to the heart and prevent the backflow? Because blood needs to only flow one way. The one-way flow to the heart is achieved by valves within the veins. So the veins have valves. Arteries don't have valves, but they have a pulse because of the higher blood pressure. Veins have valves, and these valves will prevent the backflow of blood as well, or the pooling of the blood. It will allow the blood to move one way, and also the muscles of the body will, when they contract, it will actually force or help the vein to get the blood moving. So again, when we exercise, the veins actually are helped by the movement of the muscle pumping, and helping the blood return to the heart. Exchanges between blood and cells. Um, so the blood does not come into direct contact with the cells, but the distribution of the capillary is, there's so much of them that the cells are never farther away than one cell layer from a capillary. So when a blood enters the arteriole, which is a small artery, end of a capillary, it is still under pressure produced by the contraction of the ventricle. As a result of this pressure, substantial amount of water and some plasma protein filters through the walls of the capillaries and into the tissue space that is called it's filled with interstitial fluid. And this fluid is basically blood plasma minus most of the protein. And this interstitial fluid bathes the cells in the tissue space. So substances in the fluid can enter the cell by diffusion or active transport. So substances like carbon dioxide can diffuse out of the cell and into the interstitial fluid. So the pressure here is greatly reduced. The regulation of blood pressure An adult human has been estimated to have some 100,000 kilometers of capillaries with a total surface area of about 800 to 1,000 square meter. It's greater than 3 tennis courts. That's a lot of surface area. And the volume of the blood in a regular size adult is about 5 liters, and which is the the volume of the capillaries and the blood vessels. But if the heart and the major blood vessels are to be kept filled, all the capillaries cannot be filled at once. So again, the blood flows one way from the heart to the cell and to the cell to the heart. Um, A continual redirection of the blood from organ to organ takes place in response to the changing needs of the body. So it depends on the activity. For example, during vigorous exercise, the capillary beds in the skeletal muscles open at the expense of those in the abdomen. So, and this is the reason why if you're going swimming and you're actually going swimming in the deep end, it is best to wait at least half an hour before you swim after having a big meal, because you need your digestive tract to have the most of the blood supply so you can digest the food. But if you start running or swimming while you're still digesting the food, that is when you get a cramp, because your digestive system is trying to get the blood supply, but your legs are also trying to get the blood supply, so they're competing. So that is why sometimes we get a cramp. Let's take a look at page 38. You have a table here that shows you the amount of blood that's flowing. So this is the blood flow, milliliters per minute. And as you can see here, at rest, the blood flow in terms of milliliters per minute, you have the least is the heart, which is only 250 milliliters per minute, compared to the highest one here would be the viscera. That would be your body cells, and then the kidneys. It's quite interesting to look at this. Now we look at terms here that we need to look at some vocabulary called vasoconstriction and vasodilation. The wall of the arterioles are encased in smooth muscle. Again, arteriole, I'm just going to make a little diagram here. So here is, let's say, an artery. Artery will branch into arterioles. So this is an artery. And when the artery branch out, they get smaller. So these are called the arterioles. And of course, they branch further down into capillaries. So these are the capillaries now. And then this is where this is near a cell or a tissue or an organ. And it is basing that organ, and the oxygen is going to be delivered, oxygen and the nutrients, and the CO2 will be picked up. So now you have these are still the capillary bed, but you see the colors changing because the CO2 is being picked up. So now this is called deoxygenated blood, and it's now going to turn into venules, and it will then become a vein. So just to give you some terminology here with the drawing, you have an artery that pumps the blood away from the heart and it becomes branching out into arterioles, which become capillary, and capillary will go back to the heart, becomes venules, and then veins. Okay, so vasoconstriction is the reduction in the diameter of blood vessels. So constriction meaning basically tightening. So when the blood vessels tighten, that's called vasoconstriction, and vasodilation is when the blood vessels widen. These actions are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is responsible for monitoring conditions in the internal environment and bringing about appropriate changes in them. The two subsystems of the autonomic nervous system are the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is involved in relaxation. These are the parts of the brain that control the blood pressure. The baroreceptor, okay, just focusing here. Okay. What is a baroreceptor? These are special blood pressure receptors, and they are found in the walls of the aorta and carotid arteries. The carotid arteries are the large arteries that lead from the ascending aorta and into your brain. So the carotid arteries, you could actually feel them on your neck, and that is where your pulse would be. That's the pulse on your neck. That is the carotid artery. The jugular vein is actually what you could kind of feel. The one that is bulging on your neck is the jugular vein. The carotid artery are just behind it, and the carotid arteries are the ones with the pulse, and they are deeper. Arteries generally are deeper than the veins. And if you take a look, for example, if you look at see here, what you could see on my arm, those are the veins. You could see my veins. You can't see my artery, but you can feel your artery because you have a pulse. So here, right here, I feel my pulse, and that right there is a vein, but underneath that would be an artery. Yeah, so just to kind of review here, this would be a good opportunity to review. Artery would have high blood pressure. Arteries are deeper, which is your body's way of protecting the arteries again because they have high blood pressure. If you cut an artery, because of the high blood pressure, the blood will sprout and blood loss would be more significant than cutting a vein. Arteries would have, so these are deeper in the body. You will not see them. They're not that visible, but they will have a pulse. You can feel them. Veins are lower blood pressure, lower compared to arteries. They are shallow. You could see them. It's just underneath the skin. You'd be able to see your veins. And they have no pulse, but they have valves to prevent the pooling of the blood and allow the blood to return back to the heart. And you know that if you cut yourself by accident and you could see that the blood is gushing out and it's bright red, it's gushing out because it is high blood pressure, and it is bright red because it contains oxygenated blood, unless you're talking about the pulmonary artery. Veins, they take the blood sample from the vein and not an artery because it's lower blood pressure. It is a darker red in color. It contains deoxygenated blood. Okay, so the control of blood pressure, again, like I mentioned before, all the organs in our body are not a standalone functioning organ. They function, they do their special job, but they work with all the other organs within the organ system, and that organ system works with other organ system to maintain homeostasis, and that is how an organism um, maintains good health, because of the every single organ system and every single organ and every single tissue and every single cell all working together. So the key word in achieving homeostasis is working together. So the role of the kidney in controlling the blood pressure. The kidney, we're going to talk about the kidney in more detail in our next unit called the excretory system. But in terms of the circulatory system, the role of the kidney is to monitor the blood pressure and take action as needed. The blood pressure monitors the fluid balance in the body. So if, for example, the blood pressure goes up or goes down, the kidney will then have to adjust the output of water to regulate the blood pressure. It does this through an enzyme called renin, which constricts the blood vessel. So this enzyme constricts the vessels, which in turn increase the blood pressure. So the kidney will monitor the fluid output, which will then monitor the blood pressure of the organism. So the control of the blood pressure in the capillary bed. So what are the things that we can do if the person has hypertension? Cells where infection or other damage is occurring will release substances like histamine that will dilate the arteriole and increase the blood flow in the area. Nitric oxide is also a dilator of blood vessels. So this will dilate the blood vessel. When the blood vessels are stimulated, they will synthesize the nitric oxide and it will diffuse into the wall of the vessel, causing that vessel to relax. When that happens, it will decrease the blood pressure. Nitroglycerin is also something that is prescribed to reduce the pain of the heart. It's called angina pectoris or angina, which is a chest pain. It does this by generating the nitric oxide, which will relax the wall of the artery and arteriole. So this will affect the pressure in the artery and arteriole, and it will then relax them to alleviate the pain in the chest. Shock, trauma to the body, or severe bleeding may cause shock, which may result in capillary beds opening without others closing in compensation. So the volume of blood, even though the volume of blood remains unchanged, the blood pressure will decline as the blood pools in the capillary beds. The heart can only pump as much blood as it receives. So if there is an insufficient blood getting back to the heart, the output and the blood pressure then will drop. So blood loss will result in decrease of blood pressure. If untreated, shock is usually fatal. Again, this is your body trying to reduce the blood loss by lowering the blood pressure, but this can prove fatal because it will be critical for the brain and the heart itself. If not getting enough blood, it won't be receiving the oxygen that it needs to survive. So when the animal, what happens when the blood supply to the rest of the body is sharply reduced, the oxygen that will be available to those organs will go to the organs that need it the most, the brain and the heart. Okay, so that is the end of the lesson 3, blood pressure. And now we have lesson 3, exercise. So I'm going to get you to do these questions and hand in. So if you could take a picture of your answers on page 41 and 42 of these. If you don't have the book, again, I will post these so that you can answer them on a piece of paper, take a picture and email them to me.